It's one November evening in 1973 in a suburb of Ohio. The smell of coffee reheated from the afternoon still lingered in the warmth of the kitchen. The ceiling light cast its glow onto a wooden table marked with a few faint scratches. Outside, the station wagon had just been turned off, its headlights sweeping across the garage door before disappearing. Mother walked in carrying 2 grocery paper bags, their bottoms slightly softened by the weight inside. She set them down and took out a can of tuna, a package of spiral pasta, a can of cream of mushroom soup, half a bag of frozen peas, and a bag of potato chips crushed flat at one corner. On the table, the local grocery store calendar was still open to the month of November. The oven began to radiate heat, and the kitchen gradually filled with the familiar sounds of a weekday evening. Pinning the door to a suburban American kitchen in 1973. If dinners like these still remind you of your mother's or your grandmother's kitchen, follow the channel from the very beginning. The recipe box still holds many cards that have never been opened. Each card preserves a dinner that once appeared on the most ordinary dining tables across America. Every recipe carries traces of a time when a can of cream soup, a loaf of white bread, or a casserole dish was used to its fullest value before the new week began. The first dish in tonight's recipe box is tuna noodle casserole. Around 1974, one pan serving 5 to 6 people usually cost about $2.35. A can of tuna cost around 45 to 50 cents. A package of spiral pasta cost about 35 to 40 cents. A can of cream of mushroom soup added another 30 cents. Frozen peas cost about 35 cents. The bag of potato chips used for the topping cost nearly 50 cents. The pasta was boiled until just tender, then drained. The tuna was gently flaked apart with a fork and mixed with the cream soup until every strand of pasta was coated. The peas created little green dots throughout the white sauce. Finally, the potato chips were crushed inside the bag itself and sprinkled evenly across the top of the casserole. When the oven door opened, the steam carried the aroma of cream soup and tuna throughout the kitchen. The layer of potato chips on top turned a deep golden color and gave off a gentle crunch beneath the very first serving spoon. Dinners like these remain in memory not because they were elaborate. They remain because they answered the same question at the end of every workday. What would the family eat when the grocery budget had to last through the entire week? The children had already begun pulling their chairs up to the table, and the father was about to walk through the door with the smell of gasoline still clinging to his jacket. The 1970s are also remembered for avocado green, patterned wallpaper, and hot casserole dishes placed in the center of the dinner table. Tuna noodle casserole only opens the very first door. In countless American kitchens of those years, what truly kept many more dinners going was the package of ground beef wrapped in wax paper, still resting quietly in the refrigerator, waiting for its turn. Ground beef was the savior of dinner in 1975 at suburban supermarkets across the American Midwest. A tray of ground beef wrapped in clear plastic was usually found in the refrigerated case at the end of the meat aisle. The price per pound ranged from about $1.09 to $1.29, depending on the town and the week. The homemaker picked up the tray of meat, checked the price label one more time, and then placed it into the shopping cart, between a bag of carrots, a loaf of sandwich bread, and a carton of milk. 1 pound of meat disappeared very quickly if cooked by itself in the pan. When mixed with breadcrumbs and egg, onion, white rice, or mashed potatoes, it was enough for 4, 5, sometimes 6 plates around the dinner table. That was how one familiar ingredient was stretched across many dinners while the kitchen still stayed warm through the end of the week. The first dish in this section is meatloaf topped with mashed potatoes. Around 1975, one large pan for the whole family cost about $3.10. The ground beef accounted for nearly $1.25, while the rest consisted of potatoes, one egg, breadcrumbs, onion, and a little milk and ketchup already available in the refrigerator. Mother mixed everything by hand in a large bowl, shaped it into a thick loaf, and placed it into the oven. The potatoes were mashed until smooth with butter and milk and spread over the top of the meat before the final baking. When the knife cut through the layer of potatoes, still holding their heat, the meat beneath kept its shape and released the aroma of onion blended with ketchup that had darkened during baking. That meatloaf never needed to look beautiful. It was placed in the center of the table so every plate would have a portion, and no one got up while dinner was still incomplete. The next dish is porcupine meatballs. Around 1976, an entire pot of meatballs for the family cost about $2.60. The ground beef was mixed with uncooked rice, chopped onion, and seasonings, then rolled into balls about the size of a palm. They were dropped into a pot of tomato sauce, gently simmering on the stove. After nearly 1 hour, the grains of rice expanded, sticking out from the meat like tiny quills. The ladle lifted each meatball onto a plate, with the red sauce covering the top. Young children often stared at those little white quills before picking up their forks. Adults quietly divided the portions because they knew the rice inside had helped the meat stretch beyond a single dinner. The third dish is ground beef stroganoff, a budget-friendly version that appeared in many kitchens in 1977. One large skillet cost about $3.45, made with ground beef, egg noodles, sour cream, mushrooms, and onion. Meat was cooked slowly with the onion until browned. The mushrooms were added afterward, and then a little flour thickened the sauce. The sour cream was stirred in during the final minute, creating an off-white sauce coating every crumble of meat. The egg noodles rested at the bottom of the plate, while the steaming sauce was ladled over the top. At dinner carried the feeling of a small neighborhood diner right in the middle of a kitchen where the wall clock steadily counted every passing minute. Ground beef helped countless kitchens during those years make it through the final days of the week. Then, when it found its way into baking dishes with potatoes, sweet corn, cream soup, and a layer of melted cheese, it opened another chapter of the family dinner, where hot casseroles were placed in the center of the table, and the house gradually grew quiet because everyone was eating. The casseroles that kept the whole family quiet because they were full. In 1974, in countless suburban American kitchens, the sound of the oven door closing was a sign that dinner was almost ready. A hot Pyrex baking dish gradually heated behind the oven glass, while the steam fogged the inside of the door before slowly clearing away. When a folded kitchen towel was placed on the stovetop, Mother pulled out the baking dish, with the sauce still gently bubbling around the edges. The large serving spoon touched the surface of the potatoes, where the layer of cheese or cream soup had set into a thin crust, creating a familiar sound that many households heard at the end of each day. These casseroles could be prepared early, resting quietly in the oven while laundry was being folded in the utility room or the wall-mounted telephone rang once again. By dinner time, all that remained was to place the baking dish on the table and serve each portion. The fourth dish is Chinese pie, a name that had long appeared in many families across New England and Canada before making its way into American kitchens during the 1970s. Around 1974, an entire baking dish cost about $2.90. The bottom layer consisted of ground beef cooked with onions until browned. Above it was a layer of golden creamed corn from a can. Finally, mashed potatoes were spread across the top with the back of a spoon, leaving gentle ridges before the dish went into the oven. When it was done, the edges of the potatoes turned a light golden color, while the meat juices bubbled up along the sides of the dish before thickening. The serving spoon scooped down, gathering all 3 layers at once, and the father often looked for the corner piece. The potatoes had browned the most. The mother quietly glanced at what remained, calculating whether there would still be enough for a small plate the next morning. Some casseroles never tried to hide their thriftiness, but they kept life's worries from following everyone to the dinner table. The fifth dish is chicken divan. Around 1976, one large baking dish cost about $4.25. Frozen broccoli was arranged first, shredded chicken was spread on top, and then cream of chicken soup mixed with milk was poured evenly over everything. Cheese was sprinkled on last, followed by a little crushed cracker topping to create a light golden crust. When the baking dish was brought to the table, the aroma of hot cheese blended with the cream soup filled the kitchen. Mother placed it in the center of the table, removed her oven mitts, and smoothed her apron. That evening's dinner carried the feeling of a special occasion, even though everything returned to normal the next morning. Just one layer of baked cheese was enough to give the familiar home a different feeling. The sixth dish is Salisbury steak TV dinner. Around 1975, each frozen aluminum tray cost between about 89 cents and $1.09. Inside the separate compartments were a Salisbury steak covered with brown gravy, mashed potatoes, corn or peas, and sometimes a section with the brownie or stewed apples. The tray was placed into the oven, its aluminum edges heating up very quickly, while the foil cover trapped the steam inside. The child carried the meal into the living room and placed it on a TV tray in front of the sofa, just as the evening television program began. Some dinners are remembered because of the dining table. Others remain unforgettable because of a warm aluminum tray resting on someone's lap. These casseroles carried the kitchen through many busy evenings. Then, toward the end of the decade, canned pineapple, bottles of cola, combinations that sounded surprisingly new, began finding their way into the oven. The suburban American kitchen opened yet another recipe card from the recipe box. People believed that just a touch of sweetness was enough to give dinner the look and feel of a new era. When America brought canned foods, fruit, and sweet sauce to the dinner table. In 1970, many suburban American kitchens, the pantry shelves began filling with cans of pineapple stacked beside ketchup, bottles of cola, and packages of prepared sauce mixes. New recipe cards were slipped into the old wooden recipe box, carrying names that sounded as though they had come from a distant journey. Every weekend, homemaking magazines introduced another new dish featuring glossy sauce, the yellow of pineapple, the red of ketchup, and the green of bell peppers. The kitchen was still the familiar kitchen, but the dinner table seemed eager to tell a different story, one where ordinary ingredients were arranged in ways the family had never tried before. The seventh dish is Waikiki meatballs. Around 1977, one pot serving the whole family cost about $3.75. Ground beef was rolled into small meatballs and then dropped into a sauce made from ketchup, vinegar, brown sugar, the juice left in the can of pineapple. Pineapple chunks and green bell peppers were added afterward, floating in the gently simmering sauce. When the dish was finished, the sauce had thickened and coated every meatball. Its white rice was served first, with the meatballs placed on top so the sauce could gently run down through every grain of rice. Just seeing the pineapple rings on the plate was enough for the children to know that dinner that night was different from every other evening of the week. Some dishes never truly took a family far away, but they were enough to give a small kitchen the feeling of a tropical place that existed only on the covers of magazines. The eighth dish is ham and banana hollandaise. Around 1973, its one small baking dish cost about $2.80. The bananas were peeled, wrapped in slices of ham, and neatly arranged in a baking dish. A layer of golden hollandaise sauce was poured over the top before the dish went into the oven. As the heat caused the sauce to flow down the sides, the aroma of butter blended with the ham filled the kitchen. Today, a combination might make many people pause for a moment, but at the time, this dish genuinely appeared in cookbooks, and on family dinner tables. Some people finished their portions, while others took only a few bites before setting down their forks. Even so, the dish clearly captured the spirit of a period when many families were willing to try something new during an otherwise familiar dinner. Ninth dish is cherry cola pulled pork. Around 1978, one large pot cost about $5.60. Pork shoulder was cooked for many hours until it could be pulled apart into shreds with the touch of a fork. Cherry cola was poured in together with tomato sauce, onions, and seasonings, and slowly reduced into a sauce that clung to every strand of meat. Soft sandwich rolls were sliced and arranged on a wooden cutting board. The hot pulled pork was generously spooned into the middle, the sauce soaked into the bread, and paper napkins were always placed right beside each plate. That dish carried the rhythm of life. In the late 1970s, large family dinners were often connected to a special recipe that every household kept tucked away in its own recipe card box. Dishes made with pineapple, bananas, and cola brought fresh colors to weekday dinners. And came the evenings. When guests stopped by, the record player began playing music in the living room, and drinks were set beside the ashtray on the coffee table. The kitchen prepared yet another chapter, where warm cheese, sour cream dips, and appetizer platters became the center of the entire gathering. The party dishes that made the dinner table look like a stage. One Saturday evening in 1976, in a suburban American home, the stereo began playing a familiar song at a volume just loud enough to fill the living room. The orange-brown tablecloth was smooth flat. The glassware reflected the warm yellow light, and the crystal ashtray had been carefully placed beside a bowl of potato chips. The front door opened from time to time as neighbors arrived, wearing coats that still carried the chill from outside. The host moved back and forth between the kitchen and the living room, occasionally glancing at the serving tray on the table to make sure there was still enough for the guests who had not yet arrived. Gatherings like these did not require many dishes. What was prepared most carefully was usually the feeling that everyone could stay just a little longer. The 10th dish is cheese fondue. Around 1976, one fondue pot for a small group of guests cost about $6.90. Swiss cheese was grated and then stirred together with white wine, garlic, a little cornstarch in a fondue pot resting on its warming stand. The gentle heat kept the cheese smooth and creamy, while tiny bubbles appeared across the surface beneath the light. The bread was cut into small cubes and placed in a cloth-lined basket. Each guest held a long fondue fork, speared a cube of bread, and slowly dipped it into the melted cheese. Sometimes a piece of bread slipped off the fork and sank to the bottom of the pot, making everyone around the table laugh together. That dish kept people gathered around the table longer than any invitation ever could. The 11th dish is California dip. Around 1974, one large bowl cost only about $1.25. Sour cream was spooned into a glass bowl. A packet of dry onion soup mix was opened, and everything was stirred together with a wooden spoon. After spending a little time in the refrigerator, the onion flavor blended into the thick cream, creating a dip that was always served beside freshly opened bags of potato chips. Guests stood in small groups around the table, talking while helping themselves to another chip. The bowl gradually emptied, while potato chip crumbs remained scattered across the tablecloth after the party had ended. Some dishes become unforgettable because of the time people spent standing together more than because of the way they were prepared. The 12th dish is ham logs. Around 1975, one serving tray cost about $2.95. Chopped ham was mixed with cream cheese, mustard, and chopped onion until it formed a smooth mixture. A host shaped the mixture into a log, then rolled it in chopped nuts or crushed potato chips before placing it in the refrigerator. When the guests arrived, the ham log was transferred to a glass serving platter surrounded by crackers arranged in a circle. Each slice was just the right size to spread onto a small cracker. That dish carried the polished appearance of a carefully planned gathering, even though it took much less time to prepare than it appeared. Party dishes brought extra warmth and liveliness to weekend gatherings in the living room. Then, after the guests had gone home and the house gradually became quiet again, the refrigerator door opened to reveal metal molds and chilled glass bowls. Inside, Jell-O continued setting little by little. Pudding waited for the following day, and brightly colored gelatin desserts prepared to open a very different chapter in the story of the American kitchen during the 1970s. Jell-O, pudding, the sweet treats that looked strange. But everyone remembered. In 1976, the small light inside the refrigerator, often shone upon metal molds and glass bowls quietly waiting overnight. Between cartons of milk, eggs, and a few slices of luncheon meat, gelatin molds in cherry red, lime green, and citrus orange slowly set in the cold. The refrigerator door had barely closed before a child opened it once more to see whether the gelatin had hardened yet. The mother simply smiled, gently pushed the door shut again, and continued drying the dishes that had just been placed upside down on the drying rack. That decade reserved a special corner of the kitchen for molded desserts because they gave everyone the feeling that dinner still had one more delightful surprise waiting at the end. The 13th dish is Jell-O 1, 2, 3. Around 1972, one box cost about 49 cents, enough to make dessert for 4 to 6 people at a total cost of less than $1. The powder was dissolved in hot water and thoroughly mixed before cold water was added. The mixture was poured into short glass dessert cups and placed in the refrigerator. After several hours, 3 distinct layers appeared, the crystal clear layer on the bottom, a smooth, creamy layer in the middle, and a light, foamy layer on top. Every time a spoon touched the side of the glass, those 3 layers became even more noticeable beneath the kitchen light. To young children, it was a genuine little miracle waiting inside the family refrigerator. The 14th dish is Watergate's salad. Around 1976, one large bowl cost about $2.20. Pistachio pudding was mixed with canned crushed pineapple, miniature marshmallows, chopped nuts, and whipped topping. The mixture had a pale green color and was spooned into a clear glass serving bowl before being chilled and brought to the table. The serving spoon glided through the soft mixture, leaving slow, gentle curves behind. This dish often appeared at potluck dinners, birthday parties, and meals served after church services. Its name may make many people pause today, but at the time, the greatest concern was simply making sure the bowl was large enough for everyone to have a serving. The 15th dish is tomato aspic. Around 1973, one gelatin mold cost about $1.70. Tomato juice was gently heated with seasonings and then combined with gelatin before being poured into a mold already arranged with chopped celery, onion, and bell pepper. After one night in the refrigerator, the red-orange gelatin became firm, reflecting the light like frosted glass. When unmolded onto a salad plate, it trembled ever so slightly each time the plate was set on the table. Some people took only a thin slice, while others always remembered this dish whenever they spotted the old mold tucked away in the kitchen cabinet. Every family held on to a different memory, while the mold itself remained there through the years. The 16th dish is Velveeta fudge. Around 1978, one small tray cost about $2.50. Velveeta cheese was softened together with butter, then stirred with cocoa powder, powdered sugar, and a little vanilla until the mixture became thick. The fudge was chilled and cut into neat little squares. The cheese blended into the texture of the candy far more than it contributed its own flavor. That recipe appeared in countless family recipe card boxes because the ingredients were always easy to find. Each tray could be divided into many small servings. Desserts like these created a unique corner of the kitchen during the 1970s, where creativity often began with whatever was already sitting on the pantry shelf. As the molds were returned to the refrigerator and dinner came to an end, a very different part of life was already preparing to begin the following morning. All it took was opening the lunchbox, sitting beside the kitchen door to find white bread, a few slices of bologna, some potato chips, a little mustard, and the smell of wrapping paper that had become part of every school day and every work shift in an America that was wonderfully ordinary. White bread sandwiches inside the lunchbox. One lunchtime in 1974, in the cafeteria of an elementary school in the American Midwest, the sound of metal chairs scraping across the tile floor echoed one after another. Small paper milk cartons were placed beside lunch trays, while metal lunchboxes were opened one by one. Paper rustled softly as each sandwich was unwrapped, releasing the aroma of white bread, mayonnaise, and luncheon meat that had been packed inside since early morning. A slightly bruised apple rolled into one corner of the lunchbox, while a few cookies rested beside a hastily folded paper napkin. That was lunch for countless children during that decade, prepared before the sun had fully risen and before the yellow school bus appeared at the end of the street. The 17th dish is butter and sugar sandwich. Around 1971, each sandwich cost about 18 cents. 2 slices of white bread were placed on the kitchen counter. Margarine was spread quickly with a small knife, and then a layer of white sugar was sprinkled over the top. By lunchtime, the sugar had partially dissolved into the margarine, creating a texture that was both soft and slightly crunchy between the slices of bread. The wax paper caught a few grains of sugar that had fallen from the edges. That sandwich carried a simple sweetness, enough to make a child smile while opening a lunchbox, amid the lively chatter filling the cafeteria. The 18th dish is a potato chip sandwich. Around 1974, each sandwich cost about 32 cents. Mayonnaise was spread onto the bread. A handful of potato chips was placed in the middle, and the sandwich was gently pressed together before being wrapped. By lunchtime, the chips in the center still retained their crunch, while those touching the mayonnaise had softened just a little. The sound of chips breaking with every bite blended into the noise of the crowded lunchroom. Childhood memories have been preserved by that very sound, tucked between 2 familiar slices of white bread. The 19th dish is bologna mustard sandwich. Around 1975, each sandwich cost about 45 cents. 1 or 2 slices of pale pink bologna were placed on the bread. A thin stripe of yellow mustard was squeezed across the top, and the sandwich was closed with the remaining slice of bread. By noon, the mustard had lightly soaked into the bread, leaving a yellow stain on the wrapping paper. The sandwich was held with both hands and eaten quickly before the bell rang to signal the end of the break. For many families, it was the lunch that appeared again and again throughout the school year, becoming a flavor forever connected with school days. The 20th dish is cheese and jam sandwich. Around 1976, each sandwich cost about 55 cents. Cream cheese was spread generously over 1 slice of bread, while grape jam or strawberry jam was spread across the other. When the 2 slices were pressed together, deep red-purple jam gently squeezed out around the edges. By lunchtime, the filling had blended into a soft mixture that was both rich and sweet. That sandwich rested quietly inside the lunchbox, but it was enough to give a long school day something to look forward to. A carefully wrapped sandwich could speak for a mother's preparation before the front door closed each morning. Those sandwiches always carried the quiet simplicity of a school lunch. Yet, there were also lunchboxes that, the moment they were opened, made everyone at the table turn around because of the smell of raw onions, sardines, or olive loaf. They revealed another side of the American kitchen, where every family brought its own distinctive flavors to school. Sandwiches that sparked debate in the school cafeteria. One lunchtime in 1973, in the cafeteria of a school in Ohio, Some lunchboxes were recognized even before their lids were opened. The smell of raw onions, canned sardines, or olive loaf drifted through the wax paper and blended into the crowded room. Some children quietly slid their lunch trays a little farther away, while others tilted their heads with curious expressions. The child carrying that sandwich opened the lunchbox just as they did every day, carefully folded the wrapping paper, and held lunch with both hands. Every sandwich began in a family's own kitchen, where the priority was usually making use of whatever ingredients were already on the shelf and whatever money remained after the weekend grocery trip. The 21st dish is the onion sandwich. Around 1972, each sandwich cost only about 15 cents. 2 slices of white bread were spread with margarine, several thin slices of onion were placed in the middle, and the sandwich was closed. By lunchtime, the smell of onion had already soaked into the wrapping paper and followed the sandwich out of the lunchbox. The mild sharpness of the onion made the soft bread more flavorful, allowing a lunch made from very few ingredients to still have a distinct taste. For many kitchens carefully stretching every dollar of the food budget, a few slices of onion fully served their purpose. Some dishes were met with puzzled looks from others, but they helped countless families make it through weeks when there was very little left to choose from in the refrigerator. The 22nd dish is sardine sandwich. Around 1973, each sandwich cost about 60 cents. The sardines were removed from the can, mashed with a fork, and mixed with mayonnaise, sometimes with a little chopped onion or a few drops of lemon juice added. The filling was spread generously between 2 slices of white bread before being tightly wrapped in wax paper. When opened at school, the smell of fish appeared immediately and was impossible to mistake for anything else. Some lunch tables shifted a little farther away, while other children smiled because it was the familiar aroma of their own home kitchen. 1 small can of sardines could sit on the pantry shelf for many weeks before becoming a satisfying lunch at exactly the right moment. The 23rd dish is olive loaf sandwich. Around 1975, each sandwich cost about 50 cents. Slices of pale pink olive loaf, dotted with green olive rings, were placed on white bread together with a little mayonnaise or mustard. The mother sliced a few pieces, wrapped the sandwich, and neatly placed it into the lunchbox before daybreak. At lunchtime, some children carefully counted how many olive rings were in their slice, while others quietly picked them out and set them aside. Every lunchbox reflected the habits of a different family. And that sandwich remained around long enough to become something completely ordinary for the people who grew up with it. Sandwiches carrying the aromas of onions, sardines, or olives gave school lunches countless stories of their own. After leaving school behind, the family kitchen opened another chapter where potato peels were saved, broth was put to good use, and 1 can of salmon could feed an entire dinner table. Those were dishes born not from extravagance, but from the habit of never letting anything that could still be used leave the kitchen too soon. Humble dishes that showed the wisdom of the old kitchen. In 1974, in many suburban American kitchens, the trash can was often lighter than people might have expected. Potato peels were gathered into a small bowl beside the sink. Vegetable cooking water was kept in a white enamel pot to be used in the next meal. Even the liquid from a freshly opened can of salmon was not immediately thrown away. On the countertop, every ingredient was examined one more time before the decision was made whether it would go into the pot or return to the refrigerator. That kitchen did not run on abundance. It ran on the habit of looking carefully at everything that could still be used. The 24th dish is potato peel soup. Around 1971, 1 pot of soup cost only about 40 cents when made from the peels left over from a previous meal. The potato peels were washed, chopped, and slowly simmered with onions and broth. If there was a little milk left in the bottle, the mother poured it in at the end, so the soup turned a light ivory color. A small piece of butter slowly melted across the surface leaving behind a thin sheen that reflected the kitchen light. The rising steam carried the aroma of potatoes and onions throughout the room. The ladle filled bowl after bowl with hot soup, while, outside the window, the evening wind began to grow stronger. Some dinners began with the very parts that seemed to have already fulfilled their purpose. In a kitchen that knew how to make every ingredient count, potato peels were sometimes simply a meal waiting to be imagined. The 25th dish is egg soup. Around 1972, one small pot cost about 65 cents. The broth was heated until only tiny bubbles gently rose to the surface. Eggs were beaten in an enamel bowl and then poured into the pot in a thin stream, while a wooden spoon stirred very gently. Soft golden ribbons of egg unfolded through the clear broth, sometimes joined by a few broken noodles or leftover rice from the night before. Older members of the household could prepare that dish without looking at a single recipe card. Simply listening to the sound of the simmering broth and watching the eggs gradually change color was enough to know exactly when to turn off the stove. A bowl of soup like that always carried the feeling that someone had stood beside the pot for a few extra minutes simply to make the meal a little warmer. The 26th dish is salmon patties with creamed peas. Around 1974, the entire meal for 4 to 5 people cost about $2.15. Canned salmon was mashed together with breadcrumbs, 1 egg, and a little chopped onion, and shaped into round patties. The cast-iron skillet gradually heated up as each patty turned a deep golden brown on both sides, making a gentle sizzling sound in the thin layer of oil. Beside it, the peas were cooked with milk and flour until the sauce coated every pea. One can of salmon was not large, but after it had been divided into several patties and served alongside the creamed peas, the plate looked far more generous. It was the kind of dinner in which every ingredient was used to its fullest value before leaving the kitchen. By now, the recipe box had nearly been emptied. Old recipe cards carried butter stains, ketchup stains, and paper edges, curled by years of standing beside the stove. They preserved dinners that had never tried to impress anyone. What remained after all those years was a kitchen that always found a way to place food on the table at exactly the right time, allowing everyone to sit down and end a perfectly ordinary day with a meal that still held its warmth. Closing the receipt box in 1979 and in 1979, the recipe box once again rested in the middle of the kitchen table after the house had grown quiet following dinner. The avocado green refrigerator hummed softly before settling back into its familiar rhythm. A few potato chip crumbs remained on the tablecloth. A streak of dried ketchup clung to the edge of a plate. The long fondue fork lay tilted beside a paper napkin, and the bottom of a glass bowl still held a thin layer of pale green pudding. The mother pulled the wooden recipe box closer. The lid had become worn at the corners. The wood was marked with small scratches from years of use. Inside, recipe cards of different sizes were stacked closely together. One card read tuna noodle casserole in faded blue handwriting. Another contained only a few short lines describing California dip. Yet another still carried an old grease stain along the edge and the fingerprint of someone whose hands had been dusted with flour, now turned brown with age. That recipe box never needed to be beautiful. It only needed to be in the right place whenever it was time to decide where dinner would begin. Among those recipe cards was an onion sandwich that cost only about 15 cents, a box of Jell-O for less than 50 cents, and a fondue pot for a gathering that cost about $6.90. Some dishes carried the spirit of a party. Some were created from whatever remained in the pantry, and some have almost disappeared from dinner tables today. They all answered the same question that appeared at the end of every day. What would dinner be when the mother had just returned home from work? The children were already waiting in the kitchen. Guests might arrive at any moment, and the next grocery trip was still several days away. That very question shaped the rhythm of life in countless American kitchens throughout the 1970s. Those recipes preserved far more than cooking instructions. They preserved the sound of the oven door closing at the beginning of the evening, the aroma of cream soup blending with spiral pasta, the rustle of wax paper opening in a school cafeteria, the bowl of Jell-O admired again and again behind the refrigerator door, and a single can of salmon divided into enough patties for the whole family. They also preserved the image of a mother standing in front of the refrigerator, studying the remaining ingredients for a long moment before quietly beginning dinner. Dishes such as tomato aspic and ham and banana hollandaise have become memories of another time. Onion sandwiches are now remembered mostly with a smile. Even so, every one of those dishes once held its own place in a very real kitchen. If your own memories include a dish like one of these, share it in the comments. It might be a pan of tuna noodle casserole, a bologna mustard sandwich, a colorful bowl of Jell-O, or a recipe that only your family still remembers. If you still remember the person who used to make it, write their name along with the name of the dish. Sometimes a recipe does not live forever inside a cookbook. Instead, it lives on in the way someone opens the refrigerator door, looks at what remains on the shelf, and still finds a way to bring everyone together around the table. If you would like to continue opening more recipe cards from this old recipe box, follow the channel and return with us to the ordinary American kitchens that nourished generations. The lid of the recipe box closes very slowly. The kitchen still carries the lingering aroma of white bread, the faint cool sweetness left behind by the gelatin dessert, and the warmth of the dinner that has just ended. Somewhere in the memories of America during the 1970s, the light above the kitchen table is still glowing, and there is still a mother turning a few ordinary ingredients into a reason for the whole family to gather together for one more evening.